All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for Mission Impossible, Successful Change Management and Recruiting. My name is Kunwar. I'm Digital Marketing Manager here at hireEZ. Again, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And Greg, thank you so much for joining us as well. I did want to say a few things. I was first introduced to Greg and his team at WilsonHCG back in July. And over the past 5, 6 months, I've really had an incredible experience working with this team, getting to know about, the long-term partnership that they had with hireEZ and the things that they were able to accomplish. I think during those conversations, there were two things that surprised me and really inspired me. One was the immediate success that they had in terms of, some of the stats that they were able to accomplish, things like tripling candidate response rates with their platform, reducing tool spend, how they've been able to leverage market data with hireEZ. That was all impressive. But what impressed me even more than that was the processes that went into making those things possible. I think we all know that change management, changing behavior isn't exactly the easiest thing in the world, whether it's in our day to day or professionally. Um, to speak to Mission Impossible, I think those movies have brought in like billions of dollars. And I, would venture to say that a lack of change management has probably cost a lot of companies billions of dollars. So I think, an effective ability to implement change management, make changes that are beneficial for the individuals at the company, allow them to see ROI and basically just be successful in the roles is extremely key. So, Greg, I can't thank you enough for being here today, for talking through the processes that you've implemented on your own, but also with your entire team at Wilson HCG. So, without further ado, thank you again for joining us today, and I'll pass it over to you, Greg, to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, and I will do an introduction with a million caveats. I don't know that everybody caught the beginning of this where I told Gunwar that I dumped an entire glass of water on my computer this morning and all over my desk. So Mission Impossible is the race against my computer battery that won't recharge at the moment. But when Kunwar asked me about this webinar and told me the theme was Mission Impossible, kind of thought like, that's a heck of a franchise. I remember as a kid, like I was in mid '90s, probably on the fringe of being able to even watch those. I don't think I was allowed to maybe watch the first one until a year or two after it came out. And then I know there was one released this year, and there'll be another movie, I think, in a couple more years. And so it's interesting. I think the one this year has advanced AI as well, so kind of timely with what we see in the labor markets today with all the AI tools. But yeah. So, anyways, by way of introduction, Greg McKeown. I sit in Rochester, New York. As Kunwar mentioned, I work for Wilson HCG, and just a little bit about Wilson HCG. We're a global talent provider, and we're headquartered out of Tampa, Florida. But yeah, we really kind of focus on all things talent acquisition. And I'm always careful how I describe our company because I don't want to like shortchange any one of our business lines. But RPO is the biggest part of our business and really at the core of it. But we also focus on things like executive search, contingent staffing, MSP service offerings, alongside a variety of consulting offerings as well. So I've been with Wilson HCG for about 5 years now, and I've worked in a couple different capacities. I always include that in my intro because I think it's part of how I got involved with hireEZ and the role that I am in today really kind of stems from my time in the delivery part of our organization, where I led client teams, recruitment teams, and really worked with as almost an end user with a lot of the tools and technologies that we have today. So kind of natural segue to my role now, where I sit and lead a team within our innovation and customer success organization. And a lot of what my teams and I focus on is really kind of centered around three things, really: talent intelligence, talent attraction, and tools. So the three T's, as I would call them. And those are really aimed at supporting our business globally. Ton of synergies, tons of crossover in those three categories for us. So, we get to really kind of partner and strategize with both our internal delivery teams as well as clients directly through a variety of engagements. And Kunwar, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, you mentioned the word triple. I thought about this a little bit. That probably is true, but I think what is also true is that we actually had some of our recruiters, either 5x, 10x their response rates, and really their engagement as we've worked with hireEZ. So the 3x is kind of a conservative on the whole, but we have some users who's gone well above and beyond that, and I kind of say that to highlight them, which I'll talk about, how we utilize the tool today, obviously, but really how we kind of look at data and performance and really kind of highlight some of those users who are really, really strong at what they do. And yeah, I think like the only other thing I would mention at the onset is, with us being a global RPO provider, we have a variety of clients across multiple different industries. You're going to hear me say that a million times, in different geographies. And, it really kind of leads to some of the variability that we need to look at when we measure success and tool utilization. So I just say that to kind of preface this conversation. I know probably some of the folks on the line are, working directly for a corporation. Others might be in staffing, RPO, all across the board, right? And so with us being in the RPO business, I think we have a kind of unique look at the way we manage tools and performance, as well as adoption of those tools and as we implement. So.
Absolutely, Greg. Thank you so much. And I think that paints a pretty clear picture for everyone for all the different sectors and areas that you've, been in over the course of your career. And I wanted to focus on one of the T's to start that you talked about, which is technology, right? And I think one thing that WilsonHCG has done, especially in our conversations that we've had, has done a good job of empowering your users with the best available resources to make sure that they're able to do their job. So I kind of wanted to start unpacking there. So can you tell me that, as an organization dedicated to ensuring your users have the right tools that they need, what goes into your TA team's tech evaluation process? What are you guys usually looking at?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that we'd probably describe this internally, really. I mean, I'll talk to it through the kind of recruitment tools lens rather than tech holistically. And I do say it that way specifically because really our team, I have a number of colleagues who focus on tech research and provide consulting to customers with that tech research. And that tends to be a very customized experience, kind of spanning different categories of HR tech in the market today. But as it relates to our delivery teams, we really kind of need to tick a few boxes when we evaluate new tools and technologies or existing tools and technologies too, right? There's something to be said about that, especially as you kind of think about tech roadmaps and what might be coming out in the near future. We're always looking at kind of everything holistically, but some of the kind of key things or key features that we really hone in on. We really need all of our technologies, not just recruitment tools, to be really kind of adaptable and flexible, and how not only the tool can be used, but also how it's deployed, right? So we have a variety of different teams, accounts have different needs, right? And so that kind of flexibility is something that we're always looking for, which kind of segues into the next thing I could think of, which is really, we have users who have a wide variation of skills and experiences, right? And so we need to be able, we implement technologies with that in mind, and it's kind of a balancing act where we don't want a technology to be kind of oversimplified to the point where it puts limitations on some of our most proficient or experienced folks. So it's really kind of a hard balance to strike, if you will, is like, how do we serve all of our user base, knowing that we have this variety of different skill sets within the business. So another thing that kind of comes to mind is really just, time saving or efficiency gains. So that's something that we're always kind of flesh out when we bring in a new technology, right? And really look at it holistically, because there are some cases or scenarios where you could save time in one or two areas, but inadvertently kind of introduce another complexity or even a burden in some cases somewhere else along the line. And so you kind of have to be conscious of that and make sure that you're evaluating it holistically. ROI is another one. A lot of times that's measured after the fact, but that is something that we do look at in terms of structure. Is how are we going to determine ROI? What are KPIs? What do they look like with any new technology, and how do we kind of think about that? In terms of it enabling our business itself, our customer, the value proposition we bring to them. Differentiators too, right? Like a lot of our not only competitors but customers, right, might already have something in hand when we partner with them, right? And so how do we kind of either differentiate or complement those existing tools that a customer might already bring? Outside of that, other things I can really think of, maybe I mentioned complementary tech. So if we have different tools in our tech stack, right, we're always kind of looking to balance those, and essentially not. There's always going to be a little overlap here and there, but we're looking for tools that are complementary to one another. Market research really kind of comes to mind there, and I think most companies have the ability to pull some sort of data or market research from a variety of different sources, some of which are publicly available. But that's one of the areas where I think we're always looking for complementary tech, which hireEZ's done a fantastic job giving us. So yeah, those are the kind of things that come to mind, and I'm happy to elaborate or clarify on any of those points.
I love that. And I think one thing that we've definitely talked about is sort of a through line that'll be discussed during today's session, which is the continuous process of it all, where, you guys do have individuals who are dedicated to continuous tech evaluation, understanding what needs are met, where that overlap is, and really just the continual process of evaluating. And I think that extends not only to the technology side, but I also want to unpack it with user and training a little bit later in the session. So I think that's a great precursor. So I wanted to sort of delve into technology adoption with hireEZ. So before we get into sort of some of the benefits and the process of change management, where you go from, the starting point to where you guys are today and continuing to achieve, Wilson's use of hireEZ was in three key areas when we discussed it. It was market research, sourcing, and engagement. Can you sort of set up a framework of the initial challenges and like the source associated learning curve that happens with, your team and all of those areas? Because, with new tool implementation, it's not always an easy on-ramp. So why don't we start with market research? What were some of those initial challenges and that sort of learning curve your team went through?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple things that really kind of stick out to me from a market research perspective, as it relates to how we utilize the tool. Two in particular probably are relevant for this conversation, with the third kind of being, we're able to look at data to help inform things like consulting engagements or new business, which I really won't go into too much about that. But ultimately, I think there's a couple different use cases for market research that come with adoption challenges or nuances that need to probably be refined continuously. So the first one that is really obvious to us within our business is how we utilize market research with hiring managers, right? So, if we think about how a recruiter might use insights or data with a hiring manager, most oftentimes it's maybe during an intake call or an initial kickoff for a new position. And I think the challenges with either a new user or existing user is kind of getting them comfortable with the data itself first and foremost, right? And so I know, like, early on when we started using hireEZ, it was new to everybody, and so we really kind of had to digest and really work with the hireEZ team to really kind of get the lay of the land, so to speak, in terms of what it is that we're looking at. I mean, there's a ton of different data points at our fingertips within the platform, right? And the insights portion of the platform really is kind of where recruiters are able to go in and maybe understand a little bit more about their own company that they're working on behalf of, certainly competitors, right? Or different markets and different geographies around the world. So that kind of really helps us just understand how to be prepared, come into an initial conversation or an existing one, right? It could be an update call several weeks into a surge, but coming with data to those calls is something that we really, really pride ourselves in. And I think with recruiting, you might already be an expert in maybe a certain subject area, or conversely, I guess it could be the first time you've ever recruited for a biochemical engineer, for instance, right? And so the insights really allow our recruiters to walk into those calls with a different level of education than they would otherwise be able to achieve, right? Just by even Googling something, right? It's condensed information in a way that's digestible, so that I talked about the variety of the level of recruiters that we have, right? everybody's kind of on par when the data is in a similar format, then it becomes education and how to almost like uh, allow them to shine with that data during a conversation, right? So the adoption curve here really, to me, is around knowing what data points to use, which is something that we work with our teams on all the time, right? Either direct leaders or, the bigger picture when we talk about kind of training from a COE standpoint. But yeah, we work with our teams on not only finding that relevant data, but pulling it out and making it impactful, right? Because that's one of the things, for us working with clients, it's so much about storytelling and being able to not only just show up with numbers on a screen, but what do they mean? How is it going to impact a search? And really kind of what ideas are we coming with that perhaps can solve the problems that the hiring manager has, right? Maybe historically a rec's been open for 200 days, and based on the data we might understand why that could be, and oftentimes we're finding solutions to that problem, right? So I think that the biggest challenge really when it comes to kind of utilizing market research and data, is really kind of have this short window when you're working with a hiring manager. A lot of times I know it's like a 30-minute call, you might only get 20 minutes of it, but you have this like short period of time to get in front of somebody, and really provide them with structured, organized, and digestible data, right? That aligns with their goals, the search itself, and is aimed at providing education. So, one of the things that we do around that is, because we're all in the same platform, we don't templatize everything, but we templatize to some extent what good looks like, right? It's always adaptable. It's, everybody's free to adapt it as they see fit, but, kind of giving our teams these almost templatized data structures, if you will, really kind of helps ensure that one, we can show up consistently, no matter the client, no matter the recruiter. But then two, it's, pulling on these relevant data points that we think are going to be impactful to any search, allowing the user to customize from there. So, I think that's one of the biggest things. I mean, the other thing that comes to mind, or the other aspect of this, I guess, would be on the sourcing side of the platform, where again, similar premise, right? We utilize the sourcing side a lot of times ahead of a role kicking off to kind of give us that snapshot of who's active or what we're actually seeing in terms of candidates in the market. So that's another huge advantage, right? Is that we can go in there and start sourcing before we formally kick a role off with a hiring manager. And when we're able to come to that conversation and even screen share, right, profiles that we're finding, it just really helps with calibration. And I think most people in recruiting would appreciate, like, if you're not getting good details up front, or if you're not fully calibrated from that initial conversation, there's a high likelihood that you're out there sourcing for a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, sometimes totally missing the mark, right? And so that is really the key of why this data is so important, and why we, in particular, utilize it to come to these conversations with hiring managers.
Yeah, Greg, I absolutely love that. We actually had a question that came in through the chat that was relevant to what you're talking about. If you could just list out a couple of like the data points that you guys do look at with EZ Insights, just so, before you get into sort of the sourcing practice, what are some of those data points that you tend to look at?
Sure, definitely. So, understanding geography is one of the most important things, and I'll kind of unpack that a little bit because it's vague. But a lot of times when we're looking, let's say that we're going to do look at some market intel on company A. I'll just say company A, not to name a specific one. And company A has 100 different locations in the US, for instance, right? My role might be, in one particular state or one particular metro. But it's important for me to understand, like, where does the other headcount in this business sit? How did the competitors change from market A to market B? I think, like, a lot of times people tend to think of competitors as like solely being industry, right? Or solely being specific to to a geography almost, right? But like you can have a competitor for talent that is completely uncorrelated with the company that you're hiring for. So, being able to see that competitor data, I think is huge because it not only sparks ideas as to whom we should go after and potentially target, but it also gives us some indications, particularly around like, well, what are this competitor's attrition rate look like, right? Are they seeing a large outflow of employees for some reason, right? So we're always looking at that data at the company level specifically. Um, Diversity has been continued to be just a very hot topic for all of our clients, right? And that's something that we feel really good about getting data on through the platform. I would couple that with compensation information. That's another one that everybody always is interested in, right? So those are a couple of the things that that we really kind of hone in on. The other big one that I would say that we constantly look at is skills and skill distribution. The interesting part about, I think, whether you're in the insights side or the sourcing side, right, is being able to see those skills when you do maybe a keyword search or a Boolean search. How does that impact the market up or down? And the market, I mean like the total of your search results, right? And so, stripping out a keyword, adding in a keyword, how does that impact your talent pools? That's all tangible information that when you show up with a hiring manager, you, like I said, you can either screen share it, you can talk them through it, and a lot of times we've all heard of purple squirrels, right? And everybody wants that perfect candidate, but reality is kind of in the data itself as to like, all right, if we take out this skill, it opens our talent pool by X%, right? So that's a huge one that we're always looking at in terms of data points is what that skill manipulation in your search does to your search results. It really helps set expectations with hiring managers.
That was perfect. And I think that gave a pretty good overview of all of like the hot ones that we hear in terms of like things that people want to focus on, whether it's diversity, compensation, et cetera. So it's good to know like those are relevant and continue to be used to inform recruitment strategy. And Gerard gave a thank you for his question being answered. So thank you, Gerard, for the question. I wanted to ask about, once you're done with market research and you go into sort of the sourcing and engagement piece, what were some of those initial challenges that were there of, on-ramping your team to hireEZ and, what you were dealing with at the time as you sort of transitioned the team?
Yeah, so sourcing and engagement, I'll probably actually, if you don't mind, I'll probably unpack that in two different ways.
Sure.
I'll separate the two from one another because I think like sourcing itself, this is probably where we arguably have the kind of widest variation in use for the platform itself, right? So, a sourcing, and I say that because like, because of the variety of clients that we have, it just naturally happens that way, right? A sourcing strategy for healthcare, as an example, is going to look quite a bit different, I would assume, than a sourcing strategy for manufacturing, right? So, in terms of adoption, I mean, there's a couple different things here. I see Amy on the call, and Amy, I'd give you a shout out first and foremost because and there's some recency bias here, of course, but whether it's Amy, Sam, Riyadh, Jason, our customer success support, and especially from a training perspective, from the team has been wide ranging and extremely helpful, right? Over the past couple of years. We used to have general office hours where, any one of our users could come on and just ask questions they had with the team. And that worked really well for a long time. In transparency, it kind of plateaued. It didn't get stale because the questions were always different, but it kind of just plateaued in terms of our number of users attending those sessions. I saw that as more of a positive than a negative ultimately, because we had some level of comfort within our user group. And just FYI, I don't know if I said this up front, but we do have 400 users, right? And so that's why I do talk about these things a little bit vague, but we kind of plateaued our numbers for our office hours. So what we ended up deciding to do was kind of move away from general office hours to more industry specific training. We did one last month for healthcare. It worked out really well. We had really good feedback from our team on it. And so what that's allowing us to do is kind of narrow our user group and concentrate it into people who do similar jobs. it's really advantageous for us to do this because a lot of times in a general call where everybody is working on different stuff, you might get a question that's completely not relevant to, 50 of the other people on that call. By doing it in an industry focused manner, we're really allowed to, it's allowing us to get those questions, and then the other users on that call or on that training, it is very relevant information for, right? Whether direct information or peripherally, it's very similar. So concentrating our training efforts by industry is something that has really worked well for us recently. The other thing that kind of comes to mind, just in terms of like adoption, is something that we do. I would probably describe it. I don't really have a great term for it. Follow the leader, I guess, would be how I describe it. So this kind of goes into our own usage data. So we look at our usage data in every category possible coming out of the system, right? To kind of tell us a couple different things, but in terms of adoption, it really helps our leadership team understand, who are our super users, who are our champions, right? And then how do we partner with, partner those folks with maybe our bottom quartile of users, right? To help upskill them. So, we have these subject matter experts who really leverage every aspect of the platform. We then kind of pair them with other users, whether organically or sometimes, quite frankly, forced to pair together. Um, but when we do that, we start to see that bottom quartile uplift, right? And so I don't know if it's so much like inspiration as it is maybe there's more comfort in learning it one on one, or being able to, sit on a screen share with somebody for an hour and watch them work, right? I think a lot of times you're getting good ideas from that, and then you're able to take those ideas and implement it into your own work, right? So that's another thing. And then probably last but not least, and I don't want to like underplay this at all, but the on-demand EZ Academy, right? The trainings that we have. So there's two kind of ways I think about that. The EZ Academy itself, where you can go in and really kind of look at almost every material that you would need to learn the platform. But then there's a help section within the platform as well, where it's almost like open text. You can type in, hey, how do I do this? And it populates the answer for you, right? And so I think that's really important because if I remember back, probably, I don't know, anytime in the last 10 years where I'm in a sourcing platform, if I run into a roadblock, maybe it's a ticket I have to put in with somebody. Maybe it's, maybe it may, I mean, ultimately, maybe it's just Googling it and trying to figure it out. I think these help resources allow us to get closer to that information in a way faster today than we ever have been. So, like I said, I don't want to minimize that component, but that's another kind of key thing that our users take advantage of.
No, I absolutely love that. And I think I love the sort of dual perspective on it, where you're attacking it from both ends of the external training that our team's providing and sort of that consistency there of questions being answered, but also internally you're identifying people who are actually having success and sort of, I know when we talked before, we talked about it almost like a fire slowly growing where,
Yeah.
someone's able to have success and they can inform their team members as well. One thing I wanted to touch base with you on, and again, like we don't have to name any names in terms of other platforms, but like you said, there's usage of other tools within the industry. I mean, there's so many available. And I think one thing that can be difficult for team members is, they're so used to using a specific tool or have a specific workflow, and then sort of transitioning to using something like hireEZ or getting
Mm-hmm.
either accustomed to it or even open to just using it the way it needs to be used. Can you talk a little bit if you think there's anything worth sharing there about the process of sort of getting a user who may be accustomed to a specific tool that's been able to transition and maybe see success with hireEZ?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like the most common thing I hear from people, and I'll try to say it verbatim, is, "Oh, I didn't know it did that." And that's typically what we hear when we show somebody, if they're coming off with another tool, or even if they're kind of just branching out, like, "Hey, I'm stuck in my sourcing strategy. I need something else. I need to kind of look somewhere else," right? If we're able to get them on the platform, you know, it kind of almost takes them through and speaks for itself in a sense, right? So first and foremost, it's just giving a shot at its simplest level, right? I think like once most of our users get in there for the first time, they start to realize like, oh, I'm a good sourcer and I know how to source, and this actually like the name says, it kind of makes it easy for me to follow along, right? And so, the workflow itself within the platform, I think, is very helpful. It's intuitive, which is not always the case, right? With some different tools. So, just the fact that it's intuitive enough for somebody to go in there with minimal training and at least poke around is a huge advantage, right? So, I think that's the biggest thing that kind of comes to mind. I mentioned tool diversification earlier. I mean, that is still really important to us. And we do have other tools in our business. And I think a lot of times, we see this in the data. I'll try to describe it to you guys. But like sometimes we'll see maybe really top end of funnel activity in hireEZ. But then you look down the line, you're like, wow, why didn't this person contact they sourced 5,000 candidates, but only sent maybe 10 messages or 0 messages, right? Because we have 400 users, we have to be very careful about how we look at our own data too, right? And it's not that like, hey, that person's doing a bad job because they didn't contact any of those 5,000 people. A lot of times there's a reason for that, right? And so that's another kind of uniqueness about not only having this many users, but having the diversification in our own business and clients is that, we have people who utilize it maybe just for top end sourcing activities, and their job may not be to actually reach out to anybody, right? So I say that to kind of just give an example of the kind of wide variety of use cases that we use. We have, and I was trying to think about this ahead of time. I would like to say that we have probably a dozen or more users in our 400, right, that have different job titles, different responsibilities. Certainly, they sit all around the world. And so for us, it's really important that we're, getting all the data, all the usage data, the utilization, the success data that we have, but then, really being careful about how we evaluate it and truly understanding at the user level why somebody's using the platform a certain way. That goes into how we kind of pair with other tools or how people migrate from one tool to the next. So a little bit different, I would imagine, in maybe a corporate setting, but for us in the RPO world, that's one of the things that we're very accustomed to is looking at this data and understanding at the individual level how people are utilizing the platform.
No, I absolutely love that. And I think that definitely speaks to there's still a balance that you're trying to strike with the
Mhm.
diversification and seeing what's necessary while also still finding ways to maybe like simplify the workflow and make sure like at least within the platform is at least intuitive and able to use. We did have a question that came in related to what you're talking about. I'm going to paraphrase this question because there was a shout out for a specific tool, but I think what we can talk about is maybe when you have tools that maybe are of higher expenditure and maybe aren't necessarily um, being a resource for how much you're spending for it for the business. And I know we talked about in the case study about how hireEZ in some areas has been able to reduce tool spend. How are you able to make that decision as a business from a user standpoint, but also from a business standpoint of knowing, what a tool is costing you and where you're able to maybe reduce money in one area and invest it somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So very, very adept in. We went through that process ourselves. So I mean, it kind of almost goes back to how we look at our tech evaluation process and really making sure that we have something that can span such a large user group. Obviously, when you start talking about 400 plus users, that comes with a cost, right? With any kind of tool that you're going to roll out at that type of scale. So I think it goes back to those foundational building blocks of how we evaluate tools ultimately. I think uh, the thing that really kind of comes to mind, and I use myself as this example, I guess, is how do people want to be contacted for a job today? And I think like having any one answer to that is kind of a mistake almost, because we all know that there's a variety of mediums, there's a variety of platforms and ways to ultimately message people. And I say message loosely. I'm a big phone call guy, so I'm a big believer in actually picking up the phone and calling. but yeah, I mean, I think like that's something that you almost have to kind of think about and say, where are we headed? Does this message in whatever format, via text, email, phone call, whatever, is it going to one single source? Is that single source like 100% chance somebody's going to see it? I mean, I'm just really thinking about it real basic, right? And I think having the ability to find information from a diverse host of places on the internet, and then being able to then utilize engagement across multiple mediums is something that's very, very attractive to us. It just makes us less reliant on one single source of contact. So I don't know if that answers the question so much. That's kind of how I think about it at the basic level, I guess.
Yeah,
Does that
Greg.
answer the question?
I think from a high level view, it does because, and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing anything you just said, but you talked about, when you have that many users that are using a wide variety of tools, there's obviously expenditures there. And it's really just getting down to the bare bones of diversifying where you're able to reach someone using engagement as an example, right? So, you
Mm-hmm.
may not be reaching out to them just using one specific tool or one specific method. Be able to diversify that and reach someone where they're actually going to read your message, I think is probably what you're hoping to achieve for your team, right?
Yeah, yeah, and ultimately, everybody has data, right? Everybody's got their usage data, no matter what platform or tool you're using. Every tool vendor or user has access to some level of data, right? And so, for us too, I mean, we have a 10-year plus stretch of data that we can look at. We know how these tools have performed for us historically, right? And I think that's another kind of key thing. I mentioned ROI up front. You're always trying to flesh out when you're implementing a new tool, like what is the ROI we're actually going to see here. You can look at your existing tools and you can understand, like if I had another tool that I wanted to evaluate and almost kind of compare, I can do that, but I also have to know, like, all right, what are the different features, from one to the next, and how does that either increase or decrease that ROI, or at least what we perceive it is going to be, right? And so I think that's really important to make sure that you're looking at historical data and understanding. I mean, response rates is the one that everybody would use, probably, right? Like, it's a pretty common term, I guess, but understanding like engagement rates, and making sure you can measure those too, because that's the thing. Like if you're making phone calls, if you're making text messages, right, you need some sort of mechanism to capture that response, or it doesn't always have to live in a platform, right? So that's another conversation for another day with integrations and whatnot, but yeah, I mean, historical data, is super, super important for benchmarking purposes or otherwise.
No, I 100% agree. And I actually wanted to sort of call out to something you said a couple of minutes ago where you talked about, you have a user that maybe has never used the platform before, and we could speak broadly to any platform, but let's say hireEZ goes in, we're like, oh, I didn't know it did that. And one thing we've heard consistently from like users or people that want to know about the hireEZ platform is sort of the engagement functionality that comes with it. We talked about it before, sort of the conservative tripling of response rates with our automated sequences, and it's been higher for some users, which has been awesome. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the engagement side of things? Like, what has that journey been like for your team outside of just the market research and sourcing of understanding what hireEZ offers for engagement and then getting into, good habits, best practices, and leveraging the technology to get candidate responses and make hires?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, measurement of the data still is first and foremost, and understanding what it actually means, right? I'll pick on healthcare again. I mean, I think it's I don't know if anybody else in here works on healthcare, but it's a tough thing to recruit for, right? Nurses is the obvious one. So understanding your data and understanding like, hey, it might be that a 5%, or let's just say a 10% open rate, a 5% response rate for a nurse in where I live, Rochester, New York, that might be actually pretty good. I don't truly know if it's good or bad, right? But understanding the data would allow you to determine that, right? I think this year in particular has been interesting for us, right? We've actually focused a lot with our teams on engagement, in particular sequence messaging, right? So again, 400 users, so our data set is fairly big, but we can see how many single emails, for instance, that we're sending out of the platform and what that open rate looks like, what that response rate looks like. But then next column over, we can also see how many sequenced emails. So are we doing multiple touch points? And how does that differ from the single? We can see the open rates, we can see the reply rates, right? What we've really seen is that the sequencing works, right? There's no doubt about it. I don't think we're going to get into a whole lot of AI, but the AI is certainly beneficial, right? If you think about ease of sending a sequenced email string, having the AI integrations certainly help with that tremendously. But ultimately, we're seeing it in the data itself, and we take a long term view on this, right? Like I think like not really within our business, but maybe as we've talked to analysts or different folks in the industry, there's a misperception about 1 month to the next. I mean, we don't really look at our users on a maybe so much like a granular level every single month and say, oh my gosh, this person's not doing what they need to, right? We kind of take a longer term view. All of our partnerships are longer term. So what that really allows us to do is understand over the course of time how on the margins we're improving, right? With our sequenced emails, right? So I think the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Or as we've used sequencing, it's again one of those things that as long as we can communicate that back to our teams and show them what's working, a lot of people then start to gravitate towards that, right? They see, oh, my colleague is getting a 10% response rate, whereas mine has been 6 for the last 3 months. What are they doing? What are they doing differently? Is it tweaking the messaging? So I think being able to demonstrate a lot of that data and then kind of showcasing it to our own users has really kind of helped there.
I love that. And I think, we actually had a question that tees up nicely to what you just talked about. And I'm going to try to rephrase the question a little bit because you do have an expansive user base and it may be completely nuanced based on what they're recruiting for or, what practices work for specific industries. But Gerard was wondering, what are some best practices maybe your team has focused on or learned about when getting candidates to respond positively to outbound messaging? So I think that's probably a bit of a tough question just based on the industry you're talking about, but you talked about tweaking messaging and things like that. Is there
Yeah.
specific things you guys look at to improve messaging?
Yeah, and I guess I'll relate this to AI. Not that I want to, I didn't think we were going to talk about this a ton, but it's really relevant for this, right? So, with the AI embedded in the sequence messaging, that takes like if you think of like a really well thoughtful email taking you 10 minutes to write, that takes 2 seconds to generate now, right? The key here, and where we've really seen the increase in open rates and reply rates has been not taking that AI generated message at face value and really customizing it, right? Really customizing it either to that individual. So if you're sending out to a single person, you can really customize it to that person's skill set, background, location, etc. Oftentimes we're doing it in batch though, right? And so one of the things that we're always trying to do is what is the commonality between all of these people and all these 100 people we're about to message, right? Oftentimes it's a skill, sometimes it's a location, sometimes it's commonality of experience of some sort, right? And so being able to set up our groupings, as we're sourcing, as we kind of group people into different categories, allows us to then turn around and customize some of that messaging. I'll share a non hireEZ related example that just happened to me recently. It was from my veterinarian's office, right? I got an email from him. I just happened to read it and I'm like, no, this kind of doesn't look like they're writing. And then I got another email from them like 2 hours later, and then another one, a third one that same day, and it was correction to previous email, correction to previous email. And what it was, I mean, they don't come out and say this, but it was very evident to me, right? They had used an AI text-based generation to write the messaging. It did a fine job on the whole, but there were so many little nuances that it just, nobody kind of proofread or caught. That's an example of what could go wrong if we aren't very diligent in making sure that the messaging is on point, right? So as easy as the AI has helped us generate these email sequences, it also still requires quite a bit of human intervention to customize it, to make it unique, to really kind of stand out. Um, the speed in which we can do it is unbelievable, though, right? And that's the huge advantage for us, is that we can really generate these messages in the blink of an eye, and then spend our time, instead of writing that 10-minute email, we can spend our time editing it, customizing it, and making it special. I think we've seen a bump in our engagement just based on that alone.
100%. And that's things that we've heard across our user base where they're just so happy that they have really like a starting point or somewhere that they can modify messages because, it's already generating from the AI from like the job description. So it's somewhat specialized, but it can be even better when a recruiter sitting there and actually has the time to personalize it a little bit more and just take it that extra step forward to boost response rate. So I love that your team's using it that way. And I think I also didn't think we were getting into AI today, but Mission Impossible, there you go. We
Yeah.
we did have a question come in from Tim, and he said he said great webinar. Thank you so much, Tim. He said outbound activity, whether it's email, phone, text, at some point you need to have a live conversation. So he was just wondering, has Wilson evolved in creating content across other sectors? So like, is there content that's used through video or images in, any messaging or correspondence or outreach? Have they maybe experimented or branched out a little bit?
That's a good question that I would love to be able to answer. I would say maybe, and I only say that because I don't see I don't work with every one of our users, and I don't see every message that goes out the door. But I'd imagine, we're always looking for ways to, I want to say the word exploit, but exploit kind of feels right. Exploit technologies, right, to their full capacity, and that is something that again, it's so nuanced for us. We have brand guidelines, risk appetite, things that we need to kind of adhere to on behalf of our clients because we do represent them. So I can't say definitively one way or another, unfortunately.
But that's good. At least and I think, again, common trend and through line throughout today's discussion of what we talked about is sort of a continuation and evolution of seeing what can work, what can be better. So I think like your team has done a phenomenal job of at least continuing to broaden your horizons, at least in terms of thinking about things that might work, or, is a resource or a strategy going to be beneficial to us? And can we explore it and see if, maybe there's something there? So I think great questions so far that's come in from everybody. If you guys have any more questions, I know we do have 12 minutes. Greg, where's your battery percentage at? I'm just curious.
Uh, not dying as fast as I thought it would, actually, which is positive.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm still like hovering in the high 40% range, so
So
doing good.
if anybody has questions, luckily we're still in the high 40% for Greg. I know, Greg, we pretty much, I think, covered a majority of what we wanted to talk about in terms of successful change management. I think, last thing maybe as, people think of any more questions they have is speak to that piece of it being a continuous process. So I think one thing we've seen is
Yeah.
you've done a tremendous job with your team in terms of building good habits, spotlighting success on your own team and then using external training. But what does that process look like once, you start achieving success? What's the continuation of that?
Yeah. So in short, never ending, and I'll kind of unpack that a little bit, right? So we're always going to be working down that adoption curve, and I don't know that there ever really will be an endpoint that we're comfortable with, at least, right? And so I don't view that as a negative whatsoever. I think that's continuous improvement. And something that we're going to kind of always continue to work on. But I think our partnership has really kind of allowed us to do several things. I mean, the ability to literally ask any question that we have across such a wide range of users is invaluable. It's one of those things where I don't really, or I can't think of any other service provider we've probably worked with that were able to do that in such a wide variety. So that's super helpful.